Welcome back, everyone. First, I'm going to say I'm a bit over my head on this interview, and it's also something very different for us. I asked two of my very close friends just recently what faith meant to them. Without skipping a beat, one of them looked at me and said, everything. And it really set me back in my chair. I thought to myself, wow, that's really something. And I looked at my other friend, and he said to me, it means community. And then he thought for a second, and then he said, hope. And you know what? I don't care what religion you belong to or how you look at faith or whatever, but when you think about the power of what those two people just said to me, doesn't it resonate? I mean, you think to yourself, if you have faith, it's everything to you. Or if you have faith, it's a sense of community or it's a sense of hope. So with that said, recently Pope Francis passed away. And I had thought of Pope Francis for the 12 years that I think that he was our Pope, that there was a wonderful sense of humility about this person. And again, that transcends organized religion or however you want to look at that. And I thought to myself, I need to talk to an expert. So I asked around, and one name came up like you can't believe, Father Scott VanDerveer, who's the pastor of St. Mary's in Glens Falls. So he's my guest, and I want to introduce him right now. Hello, Father. How are you?
I'm excellent. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm sorry for that long-winded intro there, but this really did strike me, Father. I thought to myself, I grew up in an organized religion household, right? We went to church every Sunday and all of those other things. And there were, we happened to be Roman Catholic, but of course there were many, many different kinds of organized religion, but they all had that in common. You know what I mean? They all had this sense of, what does this mean? What does it mean to why am I here? What am I going to do while I'm here? Not only for my own betterment, but for the betterment of humanity, right? So at any rate, you've been pastor there for, I think, about 4 years. I mean, what drives you? What made you want to be a priest?
Oh, great question. I knew one moment when I was 18, I was in church with a really excellent communicator, a priest. I grew up Roman Catholic like you did. And there was a priest who was an amazing communicator at this parish. And up until that time, I had been putting all of my eggs into the journalism basket, which is a field you know well is excellent, so needed for society and democracy. But it was something that was feeling like a pretty good fit for me. And I thought it might be a perfect fit until that day when I was 18 years old and I heard that priest speaking. And I realized up until that point, I thought that I wanted to use the skills of communication to be like a Walter Cronkite, who was the first to inform people of things. And then when I heard Father Jerry Appleby, who was the priest that day, I realized he was using those same kind of skills to inspire. And I realized the call to inform is an important call, but the call to inspire is another call. And it really fine-tuned for me at that age what I was called to do. But I didn't want to do it. I loved the sense of purpose, but I didn't like how strange a life it was, how you wore different clothes, you lived in prescribed housing, you'd be apart from other people, you wouldn't get married, you wouldn't have a family. And I thought that was too extreme a life for me. So I went off trying to find other ways to serve God that were not this extreme a way. And so I taught religion at a Catholic high school for 7 years. I worked in the educational travel industry. I was a volunteer catechist. I worked as a grant writer for a hospice home run by an inner city parish in Utica. I did a lot of things that were faith adjacent or spirituality adjacent. And I loved it, but it wasn't quite home. And I didn't find my way home until I finally gave in and chose to enter the seminary for my training as a priest.
Boy, what an answer. Hey, you hear the word a calling. I had a calling. You hear that word a lot. But you just said a really interesting word when you were describing this. you had a calling to find a home, and I really do think that's really something. So you find a home, and you're right. It's self-sacrifice. I mean, you hear a lot about that in terms of religion. Sacrifice, right? But you chose to do that, and you chose to take that path, knowing where that it might be more isolated, or I forget exactly how you just said that, but it struck me also because it is an alternative lifestyle if you think about it, right?
It is.
Um, so, in thinking about Pope Francis, and again, not really just putting this in the box of organized religion, here's somebody who just, I think, typifies what you said. His calling or his home was really to just show this incredible sense of humility. If you get outside the box there, you could think of Dalai Lama, maybe, right? Talk to me about what you felt.
I appreciate your framing it that way, because I really do think the Pope allowed himself to be a peer of all people of faith, all people of sincere seeking in the world. One of the things he said that was fascinating in his first interview, I remember he became the Pope the same year I became a priest, which feels very meaningful for many reasons, obviously. It means, though, that this loss is very personal for me. He was Pope for 12 years, the exact amount of time I was a priest. He inspired so much of the ministry and work that I do. And in his first interview in 2013, he was asked, "How can we get to know you? How would you describe himself?" And he said, "My name is Francis, and I'm a sinner." And I thought, oh, it's exactly reminiscent of the 12 steps, where someone says, "Hi, I'm John, and I'm an alcoholic. This is what you need to know about me. I am one of you. I do not place myself above you. God has called me into a role that is a shepherding role. I need to lead, but I do not lead with a sense of better than." And he preached as much with his actions as he did with his words. And I just think modern people are desiring that so much, to have people whose actions tell us as much about them as their words. We're starving for that. And his authenticity could not be disputed. There were people that agreed with the way he led the church. There were others who took issue with certain things. But to not see him as a wholly integrated, good person feels almost impossible to me.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. Just when you were saying that, I thought of two photos I saw. One of him washing the feet of immigrants, right, which plays back to, of course, something that Jesus did. And the other thing was, someone had brought someone to one of his, maybe it was a mass, and person was very disfigured, had a lot of physical issues, and the Pope went over and hugged him. And you just think to yourself, you're right, that sense of authenticity, that goes beyond any kind of scripted description that you might want to say about someone. And his name also, Francis. And I think that's the first time someone has taken that name, or maybe the first time in a long time. It's after St. Francis of Assisi, who also showed that real sense of humility, and even where he chose to be buried.
Oh, absolutely. An out of the way basilica. Yes, it's one of the oldest, one of the greats, but it's not. We just did a parish trip to Italy last year, and that basilica did not make the list for us, because it's not one of the central ones. It's not the Cathedral of Rome, and it's not St. Peter's. The cathedral is St. John Lateran. Many people go there. Wouldn't miss that on a trip to Rome. Everyone goes to St. Peter's Basilica, of course. But many people skip St. Mary Major, Santa Maria Maggiore, it's called. And that's where he went. And it's because there was an icon there of Jesus's mother, Mary, that was a touchstone for him. He found it very easy to pray there. He loved praying with Mary and for her help. And so he wanted to be buried where his faith was most alive, most authentic. And I'm sure there were plenty of times he was presiding at St. Peter's Basilica with the international media there where he was nervous, or he wasn't able to be fully centered. He was distracted. But at St. Mary Major, in front of that image of Jesus's mother, he was never distracted. So there's a pretty moving picture of him sitting in front of that icon just about maybe 2 weeks ago, right after he left the hospital, before they took him home to his humble apartment. He asked to go to that basilica and sit with that image. And there's a picture of him there. And then 2 weeks later, his casket being brought there.
Yes, right.
So moving, so moving. He was the real thing.
Yes, he was a real thing. I've got a question. I don't have it fully formed in my head, but it is, if I were to say to you, in thinking about him, what he embodied, and what do you think that means to you and to all of us? And what would we take away from that?
I would say that the image that he used of the church that changed the way I'm a priest, and I think changed the way all of us can understand the role of religion. He said, the church is like a field hospital after a battle. He said, everyone in that church, you can assume, has been wounded and they are bleeding. Maybe it's from a divorce. Maybe it's from a struggle with faith. Maybe it's from rejection. Maybe it's from being a cutback at a job. Maybe it's that their house burned down, their heart has been broken, their kid got arrested. And what he said is, in any field hospital after a battle, the first thing you do is stop the bleeding. You don't go up to somebody who's just been hit with shrapnel and ask them what their cholesterol is. And that's exactly right. And he was, in that very positive image, he was giving a critique of I think, other modes of practicing organized religion that involve people being over-focused on the minutia of people's ethics and moral decision-making, looking at the details before taking a look at the scene from 30,000 feet. And I just absolutely loved that image. It's like, for those of us who are old enough to remember the show MASH, MASH is about stopping the bleeding and applying the tourniquet. We're not doing plastic surgery here. That's for later. That's for after the person is on the road to healing. Right now, we're here to save their life. And that image of the church and of faith as a lifeboat is so important, I think. And one of his predecessors, who was Pope over 50 years ago, many people compare him to this predecessor who has become a saint, Pope St. John the 23rd. He said something similar. He said, I want every parish, every Catholic church in a town, like St. Mary's in Glens Falls, I want it to be like a town fountain where everyone can come and take a drink. What an image of religion. That's what we're hungering for. That's what we want, no matter who we are.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. You are quite an effective communicator yourself, my friend. No, you really are. Really. Hey, I've got time for basically one more question for you here. I mean, based on everything that you're saying, I've been reading that there is an uptick in the interest in church and faith in general. And this is probably after many years of a major decline, if you think about it, right? And in those terms, I was just thinking about St. Mary's, and I was thinking about those wonderful formative years from pre-K to 8th grade, let's say. And, what do you see that's going on there? And maybe what the value is of teaching, of exposing a young person to the values of something like St. Mary's.
So interesting to talk about this, because we are seeing a complete change in what parents are looking for their kids when they approach our school. Our school is 142 years old, been in Glens Falls since 1883. And for most of our history, we were trying to differentiate ourselves as a place of academic excellence, which I believe it is, but a lot of that was coming from a great teacher-student ratio where each teacher knew the kids really well and was forming them well. And we would market ourselves as being very competitive. But of course, we are in an area with excellent public schools. Many of our public schools are among the best in the state, and we're in a state that's known for a great educational system. So, our kids are not necessarily in need of a more sophisticated pedagogy. We find with today's parents, when they come for a tour, when they call our admissions department, all they want to talk about is the school climate. They want to talk about the virtues, the values. They're bringing their kids for that climate. They know that wherever they're coming from probably has an excellent public school system, but they want what St. Mary's has. And this is the way I describe what a private Catholic education can give your kids. And I find it fascinating. It's three things, and the first two are paradoxically related. The first thing it does is it elongates your kids' childhood. It gives them a really sheltered, protected childhood. They are able to be kids until they are in 8th grade. They are not hothouse tomatoes that are prematurely brought to adulthood or to an adolescence that's, earlier than nature would have it be. The second thing is the paradox that while we elongate their childhood, we propel them into adulthood because they are held to a standard that is so high. They have apprenticeships for leadership all the time. For example, each class takes a worship service, a mass every year, and is in charge of it. So the kids have to do the public speaking. They have to bring up the gifts of bread and wine. They have to do a lot of things. Yesterday, we celebrated the kindergarten mass. These are 5-year-olds that got up and did public speaking in front of 200 people. They were reading. Unbelievably, in all schools now, there's been an adjustment to the science of how we teach reading. Kids are able to read now, not in 2nd grade like when I was a child, or in 1st grade. No, it's in kindergarten and sometimes even in pre-K. So these kids are reading readings from the Bible in front of 200 people. So, and then the third thing is actually adjacent to all that. It's that we, in our environment, we inoculate those kids against despair because we talk about life on life's terms. We don't hide from things. So like we, a couple of years ago, had the loss of a beloved coach and physical education teacher, John Barberi, who's a household name in this area, partially because of his work and partially because he's a Girard. He's one of the great Girards from that academic and athletic lineage. And he died of an emergency situation in his 40s. We talk about him all the time. Our kids light candles for him. They talk to him in heaven. They pray with him. His children were students in the school at the time of his death, and we surrounded them with love. We didn't try to take away what they were going through. We didn't try to sugarcoat it, but we were able to talk about it in a way that helped other kids to know the day may come that someone you love no longer is here with us, but is with God in heaven. And if that day comes, you will be fine. You will be okay because you will know that we don't need to be afraid. You will know that life does involve a passage through death, but that's not the end of life. And we're able to do it in a way that's not sectarian, but almost how you talked about the Pope and the Dalai Lama being, peers of sorts, in a way that those spiritual leaders like Pope Francis, like the Dalai Lama, can say to us, don't be afraid. Life is filled with passageways. They can be trusted. One of the things we say at our school is death is a test that everybody takes and nobody fails. Kids understand that. They understand that. And it, in the language I would use, it inoculates them against despair. It gives them a little bit of that live virus so that when the day comes that they have to encounter it, they have the immunity. They have antibodies to meet that moment. And I can understand why parents would want that for their kids. If I had kids, it's what I would want for them.
Yes. You know what? I'm going to have to play this interview back to absorb everything that you just said. I think it was but it's so true when you think about that. And I was just thinking about what I said at the beginning of the interview: community, hope, everything, right? I mean, it just, there's a wonderful pathway here that you very, very beautifully described, by the way. So at any rate, we got to run. And thank you so much for spending the time. I got one request. On Sunday, would you put in the good word for me?
I promise. And for your viewers, I promise I will.
Okay, but
I
just be careful, okay, when you do that. Just say, okay.
I think the roof will hold up. I do.
Okay,
I
good.
do.
Okay, we'll see it. All right, Father, thank you so much, man.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
and thanks, everybody.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.